Are we waiting for someone else? Or we can start?
I was assuming Dave would be here, but maybe he won't.
Yeah.
Yeah, Georgi won't make it to the meeting as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I suppose we can dig in and start working through it, but maybe they'll join. All right. Danny, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, so during the last 2 weeks, me and Georgi have been working on this issue to support objects for user-provided services that are really objects, not just plain maps of string to string. And we want to do it in a backwards compatible manner, and we want to avoid downtimes, and we want to avoid restarts, and we want to preserve the existing service binding behavior, and so on and so forth. And service binding IO is getting in our way because it is, well, it has its own opinion on how the secret should look like and how it should be mounted on the file system. But more importantly, whenever you change the mounted secret, it is restarting the pods of your stateful set. So we had a bunch of discussions with a bunch of our colleagues at SAP, and basically they said that even though it is just pod restart, users would find that confusing because operators don't expect their apps to be restarted. For example, at SAP, they have this maintenance window that they bind and rebind various applications as needed. And then they have about, let's say, 10 minutes where the app is restarted and they expect downtime. And they don't expect apps restart before that maintenance window. Furthermore, there are monitoring tools that are tracking for instances getting restarted, and such red lights do not look good on dashboards. So me and Gary were thinking, because this service binding IO thing is not CF, it's not described by the CF API specification, because classic CF applications get their credentials through the VCAP services environment variable and not by the mounts on the file system. What do you think if we made the service binding IO thing optional? I mean, to have a value on the Helm chart saying that I want service binding IO, but I know that this might lead to unexpected pod restarts. And in case service binding IO is really optional, then we simply cannot installing service binding IO at all, which is reducing our dependencies.
So then, in addition to that, we would like not create the service binding, like a CF service binding today reconciles into service binding.io service binding, right? Don't we make an object? So we would just like
not create the service binding.
We just don't create it. Yeah. It sounds reasonable. I mean, somebody coming from CF for VMs won't expect mounted files. So.
Yeah, SAP would like to leverage Korifi to kind of have a replacement for classic Cloud Foundry deployments, but on Kubernetes. So this unexpected behavior would be surprising for the people that operate those apps.
The thing I wonder about though is I'm wondering if the Spring Stack will behave correctly. So for Spring apps, To be honest, I don't even know what happens today if you CF push a Spring app in Korifi. There's like two different flavors of service binding behavior. One of them looks for, I think, an application name environment variable and does the old flavor of like VCAP services parsing. Makes a bunch of beans based on that. And the other one looks for services root directory and finds your bindings in the file system, the new way.
So this is something that's used by Spring, right?
Yeah, it's like the Spring starter libraries. Well, it's the paketo buildpack for Java will inject a bindings library in that layer processing on the one side, and that's what does the new thing. And the old thing is like looking at VCAP services based on, and that gets triggered, I think, if you have an application name. So it's possible we're getting the old behavior. I don't know. It's just something we might think about. I don't know if SAP has a lot of Spring applications running.
Well, actually, SAP has its own Java buildpack because it injects certain sub Java libraries, so it doesn't use the standard buildpack anyway. So.
Oh, okay. Right. Well,
maybe I can give you our use case. So basically, we are using a Spring Boot application for standard services, let's say Postgres, RabbitMQ. Basically, we are not defining more or less nothing in our manifest because everything is done magically by Spring. In some other case, for example, for RuxF or other tools, Elasticsearch, if I will remember, we are using VCAP variable to read secret injected by the service broker. The way we are binding our application is, let's say, I would say two possible way. The first one is using the manifest section. So basically, during the push is Cloud Foundry that do the binding. In that case, I think the restart of the POD make no sense, right? Because we are pushing in that moment. But we are also using binding by shell. So with the CF binding, bind service command. In that case, if I well understand, there is a difference because in Cloud Foundry, if you do CF bind service, nothing happened to the, let's say, to the app.
Yeah.
But you are alerted to do a restage to take care about the changes of the binding. Instead, now with Korifi, in theory, we will see a pod reboot, pod restart.
Yeah. And you're going to see the updated data under the
without staging,
mounts.
right? Without staging. So I would say for this specific case, it's not a mess to have a restart. I can understand that someone can be confused by this because it's a different behavior respect Cloud Foundry, but I would say it makes no sense for me to bind an application and then to not restage.
Well, for you, yes, but there are people who don't expect a restart.
Yeah. Agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah, the initial idea was to turn the defect into an effect. Like, why restart if there is no need to do that? Just do it automatically. But then our colleague jumped in and said, no, this is not expected in Cloud Foundry.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess the only question I would have is like how like if we throw away the new flavor of bindings, or we make it optional, it might be useful to make sure the Spring apps that the old mechanism is still working. I think it should, because I think it looks for an application name environment variable to trigger that logic. But I don't know for positive. I think that
Whether you're going to turn service binding on or off is a question that the operator can answer. If the operator knows that there are applications that require service binding for whatever reason, then just turn it on and accept the restarts.
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense, I suppose.
We have got some ideas to tackle those restarts by making the target of a service binding not the stateful set, but the application itself, the CF app instance. But then this is not a disruptive update. It is going to lead to downtimes for sure. Which is a point on the next topic that I want to discuss, but let's reach there.
Yeah.
So, is my understanding correct that you don't mind to make this thing optional by property in the Helm chart?
I don't mind.
Yeah. No, I think it sounds reasonable. I mean, if on our end we can override it if we need to. Yeah. And we can make a call on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, right, we should turn, well, I guess we'd have to decide how we feel about those restarts, but nobody's complained about them yet. So
yeah, that's
I think we should just turn it on, and then we would have the same behavior. So
Yep.
So if we have this property, what should the default value be? On or off? What do you think? If you think from the point of view of Cloud Foundry and its API and the hint that the CFCLI gives you that you have to restart the application, maybe the more sensible thing would be to have it off by default.
Yeah.
But this is going to be sort of an incompatible change with the Helm chart because so far it has been on effectively. So I don't really mind.
Certainly the least disruptive thing you could do is leave it on by default. Because if anybody's running Korifi and they upgrade, they won't get a surprise.
But given that we're not 1.0, we have the freedom to make breaking changes whenever we want. So as long as it's sufficiently documented and users are made aware when they're upgrading to this new version, I don't think it matters either way.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of by default shrinking the footprint. Yeah. It'll make it a teeny bit faster.
Reasonable.
So on or off?
I guess we're gonna roll the dice. I don't know. How about off? Make it smaller.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's fair. I mean, I think we just need to call it out, right? Obviously, when we do release notes,
Sure.
like making sure people are
Yeah,
aware.
oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next point in this train of thoughts is that if service binding IO is not Cloud Foundry compatible and it's only needed in certain use cases, if that statement is true, does all the logic around service binding IO have its place in Korifi? Should not that be a separate deployment where it has yet another reconciler for service bindings, for example, which creates the service binding IO objects? Such a
Yeah.
component, of course, would need its own GitHub repository, its own installation, test, CI, delivery, so on and so forth.
Yes, I mean, I don't know. That's a pretty, you're not going to be pulling out a ton of code, right? Like, if our
Yeah,
bindings
that's true.
already have a bindable secret, like creating the service binding, all we're doing is making the service binding, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
then
that's true.
so it isn't like it would
Yeah,
be
fair enough.
it'd be a bummer to have a separate controller just for that.
I mean, is this a case where we could argue that there's possible different implementations to do this, which is kind of where we're at, and then this is a pluggable part of Korifi where you go, okay, if you want this type of reconciler, here's our whatever, but here's the boundary, similar to app workload, right? Where it's like, okay, here's the boundary that Korifi does and proposes. I'm asking the question, is that something we may want to consider as part of this, or is that the entire consideration? I just missed the point.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
that's
guess
the entire consideration.
yeah, I think that is more or less it. And I guess I would say I wouldn't bother. Where it seems like a lot of fuss for like,
Yeah, it's a lot of
leaving off a
work. Yeah.
component that does very little stuff.
Mm.
So, and that thing that it does isn't like, there aren't actually multiple implementations of it as far as I know, right? I mean, it's like, or maybe there are a couple, but it's a standard for Kubernetes. So we're just doing the standard Kubernetes thing, and we're relying on the controller to go, mutate the
Yeah, but
pod.
it sort of does not fit very well into the CF classic, API and app lifecycle. So it's getting a bit into the way. So if it can be turned off, then maybe good enough. Cool. And the next question is, while we were working on this story in the last couple of weeks, we noticed some places for possible improvements and so on, but those improvements cannot be, at least we think that they cannot be implemented in a very undisruptive manner. So I'm not saying that we have to do them, but what do you think about the idea that we accumulate some potential improvements, issues, or whatever under a disruptive tag in our GitHub? And eventually, if we want to have a disruptive release, just bundle all the fixes there. I mean, that in future we're going to have disruptions. I mean, it is a live project that's constantly changing, and we might have taken decisions that are not great in respect to future features. So we have to accept the fact that occasionally we would have to have such releases.
Sure. And I think to Dave's earlier point, this is a pre-1.0 project. So what kind of disruption are we talking about? Is this just basically app downtime.
Restarts, yeah,
Yeah.
downtime. Or changing, for example, CRDs. This is a thing that we would probably have to somehow do in future. But I guess that we could leverage the standard CRD version in Kubernetes. Don't know how it works, how easy it is, but it's a standard mechanism. Probably we can just use it.
Yeah, I imagine we could. I mean, there's different, I think if I understand it right, there's different strategies you can pick for like how you want your CRDs to get migrated, you know. So you don't, it doesn't have to be that disruptive. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound awful to me.
Okay.
Yep. Agreed.
Cool. So that's everything from my side.
I think that comes to mind real quick, as I'm thinking about it, is do we need to have like a more formal definition of what is disruptive, and when we would put a disruptive tag on an issue? And this is more just posing the question, not that we have to come up with an answer now, but I'm wondering if it's valuable to say this is a disruptive issue if it, breaks the existing contract of some form, or it's disruptive if it, I don't know. I know the restart is kind of an interesting situation, right? Because it changes the way apps behave. I don't know if we would consider that like an API change really, but it's a behavior change.
Yeah, I mean, app downtime is a big one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
So customers need to know, like, if we're gonna restart their apps, making your control plane go restart isn't as bad, right?
Fair.
But app downtime is something that we should definitely be calling out. Like, we're gonna restart every app when you upgrade, then people need to know that.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess the question is like, do we need to come up with a for real definition of what disruptive means when we add it to an issue? That way we kind of are consistent with future issues.
I mean, this might be an instance where we want to start using something like Uptimer to measure app availability externally while the platform's being updated. Historically, we didn't have, upgrades was so quick that it was very hard to measure on that kind of time frame. Like if it's done in a minute and a CF push takes more than a minute, it's hard to know whether you've broken CF push during the upgrade. But something like just monitoring, can you hit a health endpoint on an app consistently once a second? Like, does it disappear for 3 seconds during the upgrade because we're recreating the ingress resources, or because the pod's getting restarted, or something like that?
Now, that's a scenario where we could kind of retroactively go back and mark an issue as disruptive, theoretically. Where we go, oh, well, we made this change and we noticed in CI it changed, and now let's mark this since we're working on it.
I think that we do have in our pipeline tests that we're testing Korifi upgrade from previous release. As part of this upgrade, we're pushing apps so we can just inspect whether they're healthy during the upgrade. Yeah, we can do this.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Okay. I think that might be it.
All right.
Thank you all.
Cool. Thank you.
So nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Good to
Bye-bye.
see you.
Bye.
Bye.